Bienvenidos a Water Talk. For today's episodes, we are talking with Anecita Agustinez. I've been meeting with her in many different events with the Water Education for Latino Leaders. I had the pleasure to talk with her. And I know her career, her experience related with Native American tribes, how to engage with them, being not only consulted, but to have a voice and a seat on the table, and that all the rights, all the different policies that are occurring, or that she has also shaped some of those policies. Anyway, for me, it's a great resource and always a person to talk when referring to Native American tribes. Very nice person to talk to. Faith, Malika, what about you? What are you looking for today's episode?
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoy seeing and talking with Anecita, and I'm really excited to have her on Water Talk because I think, we've definitely talked to a lot of our Indigenous colleagues over the years on Water Talk, but we haven't really talked to somebody who's in a leadership role at a state agency, and so I think it will be an interesting and sort of different perspective on water issues in California to hear from Anecita, who does tribal liaison work for the California Department of Water Resources and has been doing it, for a long time. I think her current role, she's been in since 2013, and before that had been doing a lot of work. So really somebody who's pretty high level within the state government and trying to ensure proper tribal consultation policy and things like that. So she's just always a really interesting person to talk to when it comes to processes and, how things get done with the Department of Water Resources. How about you, Malika?
Yeah, so I have actually never met Anacita before, so I'm excited to just meet her and to learn more about her expertise and her leadership. And honestly, what seems like a very challenging job and position in terms of just the diversity of different tribes and tribal organizations throughout California and all of the different voices in the state, all of the different interests in the state, and kind of trying to make different groups of people happy. It feels like it would be a very, very challenging position. And especially when we think about all of the challenges around water and all of the different interests around water, I'm very curious to hear how she has led and navigated policy and kind of how she visions doing that in the future.
Yeah, and I agree. She's in a very difficult, or let's say a interesting position, because DWR is managing the State Water Project, which a lot of it comes from the Feather River, which we heard from Beth Rose Middleton Manning in that episode, that was an important part of native tribes. And I think Anecita brings this kind of insider perspective. With Beth Rose, we have the outsider perspective of what has happened, and now with Anecita, this inside perspective on tribe and tribal inclusion into all these different policies and thinking ahead. Also, the water plan. I hope that she talked with us about the water plan and her involvement, because it's not only kind of making sure that things are applied, but how are we looking forward? What are the plans for shaping California's future related with water?
Sam, for our national listeners, can you just very briefly tell us what the California Water Plan is?
Every 4 years, there is a water plan built, 4 or 5 years, that outlines what are strategies to improve water management in California. It is a very comprehensive document. I always talked about the California Water Plan as my cheat sheet for water resources strategies, from desalination all the way to water conservation. And it's very important because it really sets later the tone for some of the investments. It's not mandatory, but it helps to provide guidance on where to invest and what to look for.
I agree. I felt that way too. It's how to get your finger on the pulse, or like what the state as a whole is prioritizing and where there's going to be funding for different types of activities. It was an interesting document for that.
Yeah. And an important part is the tribal consultation that she led. And I'm really looking forward also for that part of the conversation. So without further ado, let's talk with Anecita. Bienvenidos a Water Talk. For today's episode, we're talking with Anecita Agustinez. She's the Tribal Policy Advisor for California Department of Water Resources. Anecita has over 30 years of advocacy experience on behalf of California's Native American tribes. She provides her expertise in assisting with tribal consultation and development of the DWR Tribal Consultation Policy. She previously served as the Assistant Director of the Office of Native American Affairs at the Department of Justice in the Office of the Attorney General. She's a member of the Dene Navajo Nation and has many other work that you have done, Anecita. Bienvenida, bienvenida, Anecita. We are so happy to have you here on Water Talk.
Good morning. My pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to spend a little bit of our day together.
Yes, and I provided a very brief summary of your career and accomplishments, but it will be great if you can share with us your career path and how you get where you are today.
I think that I've been very blessed with my career path. A lot of it really were not necessarily choices, but just opportunities. And I would say, looking back, at my various pathways, I don't know whether I could have scripted it better than just allowing destiny to take shape in its own form, to allow me experiences that were, unbeknownst to me, were foundations to do something that really was ending in the water work. You mentioned I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. Dene is the word we use to describe ourselves as Navajos. My traditional clans are Choricitni on my mother's side, and on my father is Ilocano, Filipino. And Choricitni, it means bitter water. And, within our creation stories, there's a beautiful story about white shell women and how white shell women created as part of our creation story, and how white shell women, saved the world and birthed the hero twins to allow for the Navajos to go into the fourth world that we live in now, which is what we refer to as the glittering or glistening world. And so I really look at that pathway of white shell women always as something so strong. And also, spider women who created our weaving and our textiles. And I look at these as all threads that have woven, my own personal tapestry of experiences and work that has really been fulfilling. I've always worked in the nonprofit space, and I did that for many, many years in working towards putting women in office. And I never realized that I would end up in policy, even though that was something I wanted to do when I was in college, political science major. And it always fascinated me. And I think working in the nonprofit space of working towards political leadership for women in offices. And so that was in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area was really known for having so many women elected to city councils, school boards. We had a number of councilwomen, city councils from not only San Jose, but surrounding cities, and as well as board of supervisors, and then our long-term mayor. And so it really was a strengthening. And a majority of those people, those women in political office, were not women of color. And our goal was to put in Latinas and into those political offices, and starting with school boards and trustees and trustee positions. And we are seeing that legacy continues. And then I had a career change and moved to Sacramento. And when I returned to Sacramento, that's when I worked at the Attorney General's office and really jumped into the policy space. Because when you work in the Attorney General's office, you handle all the critical issues of California statewide. And I was able to deal with particular issues through the Office of Native American Affairs that affected California's tribal citizens. And mainly it was, the Indian Child Welfare Act, gaming issues, tobacco compacting, a lot of health issues, ceremonial access through state parks to ceremonial places, and things of that nature. And so that really gave me this beautiful bird's eye view of the political nature of what we could do as a state agency. I did 5 years there, and then the water position opened up at the Department of Water Resources. And it was one of the very first positions in state government that was committed as an executive level position that was full time as a policy advisor to our director. And you fast forward 10, 15 years later, now there's probably about maybe 80 to 90 positions statewide. But it's still not enough because there's over 230 plus state agencies. And there's directives and mandates in our policy to have tribal relations specialists, liaisons to work with tribal governments within those various state agencies. But when I took my position at Department of Water Resources, I think you could count on one hand the tribal policy advisors or tribal liaisons throughout the state.
Yeah, thank you, Anecita, for sharing your path with us. And I know that tribes are very important for our nation. And in this case, can you share with us your broad description of the tribes in California and perhaps nationwide? Why they are so important?
Well, there's this unique situation when you think of tribes, and most people who are not a tribal citizen, I mean, our understanding of what is a tribe, and there's different ways to describe tribes. There's the federal terminologies of American Indian / Alaska Native. So you see AI/AN, and in Indian country, or Indian is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations. And so you see a lot of that in federal space. And then you hear indigenous or Native American. And the term indigenous is really more of a broader term that covers not only the Americas, but it could cover, in any continent, the people that are indigenous to that particular land. And it has a more far-reaching overall terminology. But when you look at, as I mentioned, the federal distinction of Indian country, well, I look at California as California Indian country, specific to California. And when I'm, speaking to, a broad audience who don't have a strong understanding of the tribal governments in California, I say, 574. What does that mean? And it really is 575 now. That's 575 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And you take out the Alaska Native corporations, which is over 200 plus, and you look at another term, which is 110. And 110 is the amount of the number of federally recognized tribes in California alone. And so that is a substantial amount. But, we're a large state, but we have quite a number of tribes. But you have a further distinction in California. Our state policies have through the Native American Heritage Commission, there is an additional number of 70 plus, and those are non-federally recognized tribes. As a state agency, we are required to work with all tribes in California Indian country. So any particular state agency is going to interact with over 180 tribal sovereign nations on any given policy, on any given day. And that's a big job. That's a big lift for any agency. And so much of it is new in terms of, even for some of the tribes, in having these new relationships or committed relationships to work with state government and state agencies. And that's why we have this proliferation of tribal relations specialists, tribal liaisons that are required to, increase the internal capacity of a state agency. And then, you have also the strength of the past two administrations under former Governor Jerry Brown, as well as our current Governor Gavin Newsom, executive orders that they have established. Executive Order B1011 under Jerry Brown, established a office within his cabinet, a tribal advisor to the governor. And that tribal advisor position was new and has been far-reaching. And so we, as in my position as any state agency, we also look towards that tribal advisor to provide assistance to statewide liaisons. And then Governor Newsom passed Executive Order N1519, and that actually codified the B1011 order, incorporated that, and that has actually become a statute, AB 923, and formalizing the Office of Tribal Advisor. Executive Order N1519, sometimes referred to as the apology. And Governor Newsom, within his first month in office, he actually had issued a public apology, is the first of its kind by any governor in California. And the apology was in person to California Indian tribal leaders to apologize for the acts of genocide and the California state policies that sanctioned slavery and the bounties and the termination policies that California tribes had to deal with. And he actually harkened back and quoted from the very first governor in California, Peter Burnett, who had a widely known State of the State address in his first term that said that there was a war of extermination against all Native Americans that shall not end. And basically, under his administration, which coincided, of course, with the California Gold Rush, the stolen lands, the lands taken away from tribes, the enslavement of tribal people to create some of California's major cities, as well as our other economic growth through lumber mills and that you would get from the gold rush activity, that took away land. So that was a big deal with that public apology for a governor to do so. And then he also coincided with that same executive order and established a Truth and Healing Council. And this Truth and Healing Council is looking at issues of reparations and how then does California reconcile, given that public apology, backing up the words, is now how do we reconcile that past moving forward? So that Truth and Healing Council had 5 years to conduct statewide outreach for all tribes to help determine how to move forward. And in the 5th year, which is now in 2025, that 5th year is a report that will be published in the new year and a report given to the state legislators. And hopefully it will have some strong recommendations on what is reparation, what is the path forward to rectify and address that our horrid past on how we have treated California's tribal citizens.
So kind of related to this, I'm curious, under your leadership, like how are you engaging as the DWR with different tribal groups around some of these specific challenging water issues in California? Dam removal comes to mind, but if there are other specific issues that you'd like to mention or talk about, yeah, it'd be great to share with us.
So the Department of Water Resources, for some of the listeners who may not be familiar who we are, we're a state agency housed under California Natural Resources Agency. And so the Natural Resources Agency has over 26 departments. So we're sisters to, CAL FIRE, Energy Commission, Department of Parks and Recreation, Energy Commission, and so many state agencies under that. But our Department of Water Resources, we're responsible for the largest water infrastructure project in the United States, and that is the State Water Project. And, that project starts with Lake Oroville. And that Lake Oroville is, there's two water infrastructure systems in California, not only the State Water Project, but the Central Valley Project. And the Central Valley Project starts further up, which is in Lake Shasta. And that is managed by the Bureau of Reclamation. And the terminus of Lake Shasta, it ends in the Central Valley, Central California, near Friant Dam. And so part of that, there's a dual aqueduct canal system that goes through, Sacramento River. And if you're familiar with Sacramento and the state capital, the Sacramento River and the American River, they converge and they meet at the Delta. And then we also get the federal water that goes through the Delta, and they're housed closely together if you're familiar with the San Luis area. And then you'll see the two canal systems. The State Water Project goes through the Delta, and then the canal system goes through Central Valley and up through the Tejon Pass. And you'll see Lake Castaic. And the terminus of the State Water Project is in Lake Paris, which is in Riverside, Moreno Valley. And so that system is managed, and that system, California has over 40 million citizens, and this water services about 27 to 30 million citizens. And what you see is kind of like this historical divide that, the population is in Southern California, but the water comes from Northern California. And there's always been this tug of war of like, this is, you're taking our water from Northern California. Then you have issues in terms of water conveyance where, we rely on the snowpack as basically our water storage historically. And with climate change, we're seeing, snowpack decline. And so there's a major shift now into like, what is appropriate storage? But for tribal people, I mentioned Lake Shasta, Lake Oroville, Lake Paris. These really aren't lakes. These are created reservoirs. And so these are storage facilities. And they go, don't call it a lake. You want to make it sound like this is a natural occurring, body of water. And many of these lakes, whether they were a state project or a local municipality, like Lake Mendocino, literally were areas that were dammed and over tribal villages. And not only tribal villages, but other villages as well for non-tribal people. And so that is another historical legacy of doing that, probably not with consultation or without appropriate reparations for that damage or that taking of that land. And so what we do at the Department of Water Resources, we manage these facilities. And there is a legacy of collections when we've built these storage facilities. And when I say legacy collections, and if you're familiar with Native American Graves Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, and then the California law, CalNAGPRA, these are the ancestral remains that have yet to be returned to tribal citizens from some of these collections that are kept in either in museums or under storage with the university system. And part of this administration has been a big push on making sure, especially through the Truth and Healing Council, is the appropriate return and reparation and repatriation of the ancestors. So we have to, as a state agency, understand whether your Department of Water Resources or any other department, in terms of building California to the fourth largest economy, it has come at a price and at a cost. And these things don't build themselves. And there's been a push and a rush to build it because of just our incredible growth and our thirst for that growth in industry, which requires water. And so one of the big projects I'm currently working on is the Delta Conveyance Project. And the Delta Conveyance Project is a priority not only under Governor Brown, but also by Governor Newsom. Governor Newsom decided that the Delta Conveyance Project would be a more efficient tunnel system because the Delta is created with lots of earthen levees. There's quite a lot of subsidence, and we are actively dealing with climate change. Climate deniers are very few and far between now because we've seen, historical, the climate whiplash, the extreme events, and a drought, flood, fire, and this cycle of events, and also the ground subsidence. So all of these things are affecting the Delta. And it is a beautiful area. People love the Delta. And, we were really pushed by the communities to say, why are you going to build a tunnel? It's really going to not make that much of a difference. But one of our major goals is public safety, flood control, and also dealing with the effects of climate change, which means, sea level rise and desalination that would then affect the quality of water that is going to, as I mentioned, services our farmers as well as communities throughout the state. So that is the Delta Conveyance Project. 4 years of consultation with tribes on that. We've certified the environmental impact report last December, and we were able, because it was a new project, to be able to utilize the amended CEQA laws, which was AB 52, in terms of the new laws under CEQA that had a new definition of tribal cultural resources. So with that understanding, we were able to come to agreement with tribes that were culturally affiliated with the Delta to accept under that tribal cultural resources, the Delta as a tribal cultural landscape, which is really really, in my mind, that's something I'm really proud of, that we were able to do so with the tribe's help and assistance, because we are not the subject matter experts by any means, and that is something that we could only come to a conclusion or an understanding with tribal input to do so. But the Delta Conveyance Project is just one of many projects. We are also doing a lot of habitat restoration projects, and with many partners throughout the state. And one of the things that our department also does is not only rehabilitate dams, and we also decommission dams. And I'm really proud that we had a small part in the decommissioning of the 4 Klamath dams, which really is more, the praise goes to the tribal communities who fought very long and hard. I mean, 20 years ago, it was, people were saying, well, undam the Klamath. And they're thinking like, was that just, a mantra that was good, you're just going to be hearing, but it can be done. I mean, that's just like the will of the people saying that could be done. And now we're seeing an undammed 300 miles of that tributary with salmon returning already within the first 6 months, which is just incredible. And so we also do a lot of fish passage studies, some of the major tributaries of the Sacramento River, the Feather River as well. Those are some of the major projects that I work on. And then, of course, there's other programs, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act program, the grant programs, emergency drought funding, which we still have working with tribes on some of those projects. Those are some of the major projects. And then, of course, this maintaining, the entire water infrastructure system, the levee system as well, is what we do.
Yeah, thank you, Anecita, for bringing all this great information and letting us know all the good work that you're doing. And I know that you've been working quite a lot in the California Water Plan and recently in the California Water Summit. And if you can explain larger, I tried to do that in the intro, but I think it will be great if you can help me out for what is the California Water Plan, and how the California Water Summit, what does it is. And
Yes, there are many types of plans that are created by various state agencies. There's the Delta Stewardship Council, which has a Bay Delta water quality plan. The Department of Water Resources, we're responsible for the California Water Plan, which is updated every 5 years, and we have been producing this document since the late 1957s. And the document itself is really every water manager from any type of public agency or private agency refers to it. It has great information on hydrology, modeling, different things that you can find within there dealing with statewide water management planning. And the 2023 update took on a different additional point of view. It was the first time that equity was being looked at, through that climate change lens versus just straight water infrastructure talk, which is really what it was, but really looking at it more holistically on water management that is more equitable for communities. And it also was the very first time I'm looking at the California Water Plan. And you can find it easily if you Google Department of Water Resources, California Water Plan. Chapter 7 is the tribal chapter. So we throughout the entire document, we did address particular tribal issues based on regions or hydrological regions as well. But this was an opportunity to have a chapter written by tribal citizens and addressing climate change, addressing tribal water rights, and also talking about the Klamath Dam removal and their perspectives on that, and especially on equity. How do we look at equity and equity lens on water for sovereign nations when you're having to deal with tribal water rights? And when you're dealing as a tribe, if you've been a restored tribe or terminated and re-recognized, then you're without those initial Aboriginal water rights. How do we look at that? How do you reconcile that fact? There's no easy answer to that. And California, our water rights system is based on seniority rights and priority rights, but it does not start until 1914 in terms of water right of determination if you hold a water right. And tribal water rights predate that. That is 1903 through the federal water rights through the Winters Doctrine, and for that Federal Reserve water right. So these are things that have to be reconciled. And then you look at California, in not only California, but any across the country. We just celebrated Native American Day this past September, and the theme was celebrating 100 years of citizenship. It was not until 1924 that any Native American person was given the right to be a citizen of the United States and the right to vote. And so you talk about equity and being outside of the political process, being stripped of your land, being stripped of your voice, and then how then are you able to deal with this reconciling that horrific past and be involved in policy. And then, of course, what I mentioned about water rights. So going back to the water plan, as I mentioned, this water plan, we updated every 5 years. Not until 2005 did Department of Water Resources, said, well, how are we reaching out to tribes? And created a tribal advisory committee first off, created a communication committee that developed into a tribal advisory committee. And the purpose was how can we make a California water plan that is more meaningful for tribal citizens in California? And the tribal citizens at that point says, well, we really need a summit. We need to talk to decision makers. Why are we talking to just water managers when we cannot change policy? So that is how the tribal water summits developed. And so we just convened 2023, the fourth water summit. So prior to that, the very first water summit was 2013, 2018, 2023, and I think there was one in 2009. So we've had, this is our fourth water summit. We've been very committed for the past 20 some years. It's a 3-day summit. It's planned by and for tribes, and over 300 tribal delegates convene and develop the agenda. And we have high level discussions with federal partners as well as state agency partners discussing critical issues like the Salton Sea, Colorado River issues, and then, of course, any other topics. And one of the big topics was data sovereignty, in terms of how then do you have data sovereignty within water management planning that is understood that it is intellectual property, because you have federal policies being advanced simultaneous to all of these things I've been talking about in the last 10 years or so, not only under Biden, but also that began under the Obama administration, in terms of addressing traditional ecological knowledge. And how then do you involve traditional ecological knowledge in water management planning? And so that was what this workshop on data sovereignty, and understanding that it is for our department, we've gone beyond TEK based on tribes telling us it's more than just traditional ecological knowledge. It's indigenous science, it's tribal science, tribal knowledge. And so I'm more comfortable using those terms than TEK, with the understanding that that is the direction tribes want us to use as a state agency to us. And so our director is on record that best available science is inclusive of tribal knowledge and tribal science, and that it's inclusive, but we don't define it. We don't have the ability to define it. That is defined by the citizens of any particular region, tribal citizens, based on their knowledge of that watershed, that region. And it's different for every tribe. And you could have tribes overlapping a multiple jurisdictional approach, but they're each going to have their own definition, which we're going to have to honor as best available science. So those are things that get me super excited about the work that I do, and how we can, support those interests, those topics moving forward. And already we're convening, some working groups for the 2028 Tribal Water Summit. And it takes a couple of years to plan, because all the fundraising goes to support the travel of elders and to feed people and to help them with their lodging as well. And so that's why we can really guarantee really strong participation. And it's in person, and it has been in person every time. And this last one we held that over 3 days at our natural resources building and in Sacramento. So it was really a huge success. Our summary of proceedings is almost published and will be out. And it really does recap in the California Water Plan. You can go back to see every tribal water summit, the topics and a summary of the various workshops and topics covered.
Thank you so much, Anecita. You briefly mentioned the Colorado River, and I did see that you were at CRUA, the Colorado River Water Users Association. I guess that was just maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about maybe California's approach to sort of tribal issues within the context of the Colorado River, which I know complicates things because it's a multi-state, multinational kind of agreement management scheme. So yeah, just wondering about kind of your role at that meeting and the role for California tribes there.
Yeah, my role at the meeting was really to just kind of keep my ears to the ground in terms of just what tribes are looking at. 2026 is upcoming, and a lot of those memorandums will expire. And as I mentioned, the development of major water infrastructure policy without tribal input. And so many of these compacts were developed in 1922 that started the Law of the River. And we're talking an upper and lower Colorado River watershed basin, that covers 7 states and over 30 tribes in 2 countries, United States and Mexico. And now we call them the 10 consulting tribes in the lower basin, but there's many more tribes that are involved. And as Navajo, I take a very strong interest because my family's from northern Arizona. And we're up there by Lake Powell and Glen Canyon Dam. And that water there is stored there and then goes to Lake Mead to service California. And it bypasses Navajo Nation. We're the largest land-based tribe in the United States, as well as the largest number of citizens, and we don't have access to the water that comes from our watershed there. And Glen Canyon Dam was part of our Navajo boundaries, but when they decided to dam Glen Canyon, they took it out of our jurisdiction. So, I mean, this has been water management throughout the years, the displacement of tribal interests. And what we're seeing now is the Colorado River Indian tribes, the 10 tribes that have been at the table helping to renegotiate, are all tribes that have shared in various forms of economic development in the past couple of decades. They're better positioned with their own tribal citizens going on, getting law degrees, getting water degrees, coming back, working for their tribes. So we don't have to have these spokespeople that were like, for instance, our trust guardians. They're speaking on our behalf, who were not speaking on our behalf, signing away agreements that did not benefit tribal governments. And so the big thing is what direction is going. There are several tribes in California that share a border with Nevada and Arizona. And so these are unique situations where a tribal government is working with 2 states and dealing with the Colorado River water issues. And so it's quite unique. And I enjoy working with those tribes. We're talking about, 4 or 5 tribes as well as Arizona tribes. And, so part of what we were doing is we were convening, and I was speaking, and there's a developing Indigenous Women's Water Network, and the International Women and Water Diplomacy as well. And so it's a great opportunity to network because it's opportunities to be a mentor as well as to see these young women that are going into that water space and being able to see what they're doing. And they're doing it on not only on a regional scale, but they're doing it on a global scale. And so that intrigues me, and I'm excited. It makes me almost wish I was 30 again, just to see where we can move all of these policies and issues. But, I'm going to be in retirement mode in a few more years. And so I'm just looking at helping anyone with information sharing and mentorship, which I do quite a bit. But it's exciting, and that was Faith going there and seeing that it was really exciting to see, and then hearing the tribal leaders speak directly. I got to hear my tribe's president, Boo Nygren, speak with Gila River's governor and Governor Stephen Lewis, doing amazing things for the Gila River Indian community in Arizona, and then Chairman Hart from Mountain Ute as well speak about issues from the Upper Basin. And that was a very powerful discussion. I was really pleased that I was able to hear that in person and be in that audience. And then, going back to Colorado River, the delivery system that goes through Imperial Valley, that also services the issues of many of the Kuya tribes in Southern California that depend on that. And also with the Coachella Valley Canal system, that was also part of a major 60-year settlement on behalf of the 5 bands of the San Luis Rey Indian Water Authority. So following those issues as well, and then of course the work that we do at our department with Salton Sea, and how then the Colorado River is also services that as well. So these things are just, waters are just so interconnected, and through all these issues, and they just bypass all kinds of tribal lands and tribal issues.
So we always like to ask our guests if there's anything more that you would like people to know about your work and how that's us and the Water Talk listeners, can support your efforts.
The area that I really find that's really intriguing is, the land back movement, and how we have a commitment through natural resources to support tribal nature-based solutions and the return of land. But I always caution that land return, comes at a price. Sometimes it's co-management. Sometimes is it really truly return, so that a tribe can do what it needs to do with the economic development or not. And so if you're getting land return just to hold it, to keep it in conservation, oftentimes that is very good because it gives you ceremonial access to your areas or sacred lands. But, California's been built on the back of our most disenfranchised communities, not only tribal communities, but other communities as well. And, this is another opportunity for, appropriate reparations of that. And I always say, land back, you need water. And I really think if you're getting that land back, what are the water rights attached to that? And are you really truly making tribes whole that have been terminated in terms of water usage? And I know that State Water Resources Control Board is just finishing up digitizing every scrap of paper of every water rights holder in California. And I'm looking forward to when we can take a look and put that into some kind of documentation that's easily available for a reader to take a look at who is holding water in California and at what costs. And I really think that should be very, very transparent. And I always look at those opportunities there of understanding the water rights and how complicated it is. And it's so far reaching, even above my head in terms of trying to understand it all. But I do my best. And I just think that, opportunities to highlight tribal approaches to it is where I am and what I try to do in my work.
Anecita, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Thank you for talking with us, for your leadership, advocacy, and for speaking up and provide constructive works toward a better world for everyone and a more just world. So thank you for that.
Thank you for listening to the Water Talk podcast. I'm Malika Noko, an assistant professor and state extension specialist in agricultural water management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
I'm Faith Kearns, and I'm the Director of Research Communications with the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative at Arizona State University.
I'm Samuel Sandoval. I'm a professor at UC Davis and a cooperative extension specialist in water resources management at the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. If you enjoy our show, please review, listen, like, and subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. Please find transcripts and additional content at watertalkpodcast.com. Original music by Paloma Herrera Thomas.